And Wayne, would you like to go?
Yeah, good evening, folks. I apologize for my late joining. And I have a couple thoughts about IoT. And one of the key things I think about is whether we conflate networked sensors and actuators and with IoT. That is to say, do we want, and this is the way I ask the question,
Baby.
Do I want my power plant connected to and accessible on the global international internet? Or do I want to have the ability to control different aspects and to monitor different aspects? Because I see those as two very different points. And when people talk about the Internet of Things and these 1,000,001 devices that are going to be connected to the internet, I find myself wondering, do I want every device that I want to have network access to accessible via the public internet? I don't know if this issue has been raised at all in the discussion previously.
So I'll say something there. While the name is Internet of Things, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is on the internet. So people now, I think of Internet of Things, and I think I mentioned this earlier, as typically, when they think about it, they think about wireless. But that's not all Internet of Things is. That's just one medium of communication. And so I think some people have mentioned technologies such as LoRaWAN, so highly security conscious. And you're right, part of the decision for things on the devices is whether or not you want them to be made accessible across the internet. And there are a number of international standards where communications is concerned, in particular with things like power generation and significant resources. Things like, even if you had like an oil tanker in a harbor, right? Having access to that, because that in itself may be considered a hazard, giving people access to the controls and communications between the tanker discharging oil, right? So there are standards for that. So you have people like NIST, you have the IoT Security Foundation. There are protocols in place for that. I think we spoke earlier about, I think I asked the question about standards, and we didn't go into detail in regard to that. But I would say it's about what is, as you've said, it's application specific. It doesn't mean that everything is on the internet, yes? And it also, there are protocols in place that you put based on the levels that you require. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but a lot of the standards have, as part of them, ways for designing best practice of how you decide how much access you give. The standards in themselves, specifically in this, has sets of rules about how you decide what your system must give access to. So that's just my little view on that area.
So what you're saying then is that it is your understanding that the term Internet of Things does not imply that these devices are connected to the internet.
Not necessarily.
It basically means network sensors and actuators.
Correct, yes. But it's sexy to say Internet of Things.
I think that is a very important distinction to make, because the issues associated with connecting 1,000,001 different devices to the internet are not trivial.
And as we mentioned, we had a discussion, I think, before you came, about different communications protocols. Right. And in many cases, telecom companies have specific telecommunication protocols for these devices, which have their own, they have their low-level protocols in terms of security and the high level. So you know the application level and low-level security protocols. Yeah?
Okay.
But that's anyhow. But that's a maybe more technical aspect, I would say.
Yeah, I heard someone, I forget who it was, making the point of government or governments setting out the agenda for the Internet of Things. I have a somewhat different view. I think what we need to have is regulation for such things as spectrum management, privacy and security, safety issues, and that is the responsibility of governments. Beyond that, let the needs, the opportunities, the visions of the private sector and of individuals, operate. Basically, set apart the parameters and to allow safe, equitable operation, and then let it be a matter that needs will dictate what is done. For several reasons, I would not be comfortable with either waiting on or empowering the government to make decisions on this. I don't know that there is certainly in the Caribbean, a tremendously rosy record of government with regard to technical innovations.
It's cool. Makes sense.
Why do you compose your thoughts? Because that was a heavy bit of sharing by Wayne. I think if someone does something inadvisable and they have at least a slight inclination towards improving their practices, Nick mentioned there are international standards, ISO, IEC standards, like, for example, 27001, that look at how you secure systems and its predecessor. So I appreciate that if someone in a head rush puts everything we have online, all the 1,000,001 devices, that would not be the right approach. It has to be done in a very thoughtful and security conscious manner.
And I think
second, one final point I will make is that we in the Caribbean are not technology leaders. And something like IoT or the pervasive access to sensors and to information and to data has the potential of further disadvantaging us depending on who has access to the data and who can. So both from a standpoint of course, security, there's a real, the more connected you are, the greater the security risks are. And there is a real need for every country to have an independent information security capability rather than relying on some benign foreign country to help them out in this regard.
I think Miran dealt with that in terms of talking about before you came in,
right.
In terms of throwing away the jewels.
Right. The second thing is the data, yes. And other people getting access to the data and monetizing it. So you find that, for example, somebody has a whole set of health data about Caribbean people and uses it to market products to us in the Caribbean kind of thing. Or any number of things. There is a large number of people, we are what, a couple million in a sea of 6 or 7 billion. So there are a large number of technically savvy people who can take advantage of our information in ways that are not necessarily to our benefit. And that is, again, a non-trivial issue.
I just wanted to just comment on government, because earlier on, when in the conversation it was mentioned that all that is needed is, private sector to now act, right? Another thing that was stated was, and repeatedly, and I'm not in the tech industry or in the science and research to say no, but it was said multiple times that we have the skills here in the Caribbean, right? And on those two things, that all we need is the private sector and that we have all the skills, I want to push back on that a little bit. And firstly, I think we need government more than just for regulation. We need them to also provide direction, which is what was mentioned earlier. I don't think it was not said that the government should do it. I don't think they explicitly said government, but said we need to come together. And I think the best way for us to come together is through governments. As much as politically, we might not be fans, but governments in general, what they can provide for the Caribbean is incentives. Because what we don't have, what you spoke about, Wayne, is something that thrives in a very capitalist society, right? That has achieved critical mass. So what I mean by that is that a capitalist society where private sector is driven to research or use research to innovate and then and create a product or service, because they know that in the end they're going to get a lot of people, right? Caribbean, just by default, and worse yet, the individual islands in the Caribbean by default don't have that, right? So we don't have a whole set of venture capitalists just itching to give companies money, and that's where we need government incentives. And in order to have government incentives go into the right place, governments need agendas, So that's number one. And secondly, with respect to skills, there's the ICT index. I wonder if I'm saying the right thing, but there's an ICT index where Trinidad and Tobago specifically ranks, I think it was 68 or something in that index. And specifically in the sub-indice of skills, right, we ranked 106, right? And now how they came up with that index, is debatable, but just so how they define each sub-indice and stuff is debatable. They did it, for example, accessibility to the internet and those kind of things, and infrastructure. In one of those buckets, they had how many households had phones, right? I mean, landlines. I mean, that's not relevant anymore, really. I got rid of mine, right? So, but at the end of the day, it's indicative of where we are. And when it comes to, let's say, digital skills and so on, the Caribbean is not known yet as a tech hub or a place where, or we are not known for scientific research, not yet. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is scientific research an area that we want to excel at and say, yes, it is a plausible path for the Caribbean to be known as the region for scientific research and development, right? And if so, do we have the resources to do that? And I will debate. I don't think so necessarily. However, not in all areas. Agriculture, for example, I think is a place where we have had, wins in that area, or we've spent. I think that's an area. I mean, just based on this conversation, I'm very much aware of that. We develop, new strains of vegetables and so on. I mean, there are things that we do, in terms of our chocolate and what. The point is, we do research in agriculture. And so is that an area that we want to be known for? I mean, I think we need to, and somebody said it earlier, find our niche and develop that. Again, you need government to you know, to decide which areas we are going to focus on, because we can't focus on all. You know, so for example, in the oil and gas industry, I worked in the oil and gas industry for 15 years. In Trinidad and Tobago, we are not known for, you know, and, you know, people might not like that I've said this, but we are not known for innovation. We are known for application, and we're very good at it, right? We were very good at it. You know, at one point, #1 exporter of methanol in the world, #1 exporter of LNG in the world at some point. So we're very good at application. And so my question is, when it comes to the Internet of Things, is that where we want to be, right? And if so, then now we could say, let's put incentives around that in specific areas. So.
I agree with what you're saying. Certainly, the way that incentives exist or don't has a major impact on what gets done or doesn't. And there is a set of incentives which governments are best positioned to provide. And there is a set of obstacles which governments can provide if they are so minded. I mean, there are all sorts of international sources of funds, but many of these are channeled through governments. So if the government isn't interested in, the funds can be out there. There may be somebody here who wants them, but if it's not an area in which the government has identified an interest, then the two can never meet. All of those things I agree. And it is important that government play this role. However, I am not, looking at the historical record, I am not sanguine that governments will do so. And certainly, if we are to be unable to do anything without government playing this role, then we'll be in a very difficult position. And certainly with regard to the small size of our markets constraining our entrepreneurial opportunities, that is true, but it is also true that someone in Grenada can address themselves to a global market in much the same way that someone in New York can. So they needn't perceive that as an entrepreneur, they're constrained to the Grenadian market.
If I could put in a little bit.
So, Navan, one second. Specifically, I just want to address something with respect to scale, right? The issue with scale, I think that the Caribbean has is not necessarily who we can sell to. It is, do we have the infrastructure here? The cost of infrastructure here. So we're talking. Yeah. So that really, I think that really is our issue. Yeah. So.
Infrastructure is kind of relative. You think the biggest thing we have, the biggest problem we have is culture. Sad to say, Caribbean governments do not innovate. It's not the role of government. The role of government is to regulate, and for better or worse, yes, you can give them some pointers, but at the end of the day, guess what? In Trinidad, we had the e-tech parks, right? Great idea on paper. What happened? Bureaucracy and red tape killed it, right? Plain talk, bad man. The fact of the matter is, this came up in a government conference a while back. They asked me, what do you need to do innovation? I said, put aside some land, build some warehouse shelves, give people access to internet, and give them and rent it to them cheap for 1 year, and get out the way. That's all, right? Because why? In the Caribbean, if you want to make a space or you want to create, and this is what government role should be, that we need to change our culture. We need to build hubs, if you will, where, you know, you can call them maker spaces, you can call them what, but to encourage that collaborative culture where a man off the street can walk in off the street and say, I have this problem. And he can loosen on, he might not know anything about IoT, but guess what? The IoT guy can say, well, hey, you know, this could work with that and so on and so on. And that is when you have that environment, then you have that cross-pollination of ideas and, you know, information being exchanged, and you create a culture that allows it. And this is what I have always said, that we, you know, we look at the Singapore model, you know, everybody wants to have a Silicon Valley, right? But if anybody knows history, right? Silicon Valley started with Xerox PARC, right? Which initially came out of the, I believe it was the University of Caltech. They had 40 acres that the US military had given them funds for at one point, and you know, they had a bunch of buildings and stuff. And they were like, well, we're not really doing anything with this. So we're going to give anybody who wants to do anything in tech and computers and things, we're going to give them access to cheap. You understand? And you had Xerox PARC. Up the road, you had HP. And if you actually look at the story of HP, literally the story, two guys in a garage who changed the world, right? But people fail to realize that you cannot get to Silicon Valley if you did not create that initial environment. So when the guys in Xerox PARC said, you know, we had a problem, and they say, well, you know, they used to get up and go and walk across the road 2-3 buildings down, and they had guys from HP, and they would sit down and be like having lunch and say, hey, you know, we're trying to tackle this problem, and the guy, they say, oh yeah, this is how we right? That is what we need to think. And it's a kind of half-baked concept, because everybody wants to get to the finish line, but we are not laying foundation, right? And if you ask me, that is what government role really supposed to be. But at the same time, government actually needs to learn, you know, hey, here's what we need. You know, when government does anything, there's always string attached, there's always control. They want to control, whether it's for political gain or what. But at the same time, you understand, with any of these models, you look at the US or you look at Singapore, anything, yes, government mandates certain things that we consider strategic, but then they also know when to get out the way and just let things organically grow. And that is what we have not learned in the Caribbean. Be it a holdover from our colonial mindset, you know, where they say you need the monkey smart enough to operate the equipment, but you don't need them smart enough to figure out that, hey, you don't need to ship cotton to England to make the clothes for them to come to sell back to us. You know, and we're still in that mental, cultural issue. You understand? And as I told somebody, I said, I have done projects in Africa. I have done projects in the Caribbean. Yes, the Caribbean is small. We cannot come to scale, but guess what? 1.3 million people in Trinidad, that's a pretty good test bed to test and work on basic king survey product. Then you hop across the Atlantic and you go to Africa and you go to Cote d'Ivoire, and bam, 21 million people. You go to another small country, Senegal or one of them, you know, a couple million people there. You understand? Everybody, you know, when they talk about Africa being the next big, you know, thing, it's true. You understand? And guess what? The Caribbean, we are in a funny position because in a nexus between history and culture. You know that, you know, they don't, the Africans, they don't like the Chinese, because the Chinese, you know, kind of thing, and they're mediocre, and they don't like the Europeans and the white man, because white man abuse them and they're too expensive. And we have a potential to kind of carve out a neutral middle way niche there, where, you know, we could offer a product that, you know, hey, might not be as expensive as the Americans, but it would not be crap like the Chinese. And this is from my experience, right? And you treat people fair, you understand? You treat them like how we treat ourselves, you understand? No matter where you go in the Caribbean, you know, we tend to be the ones, you know, something go wrong, you see everybody come out with food, and, you know, as I tell somebody, I say, always see the best of our people when there's a crisis, right? And most of the time, when you look at Trinidad, when they talk about, we had the flooding last year? right? It was citizens who were mobilizing even before the government. You understand? You want to see the best in the people. You look at the citizens and how they respond to that crisis. You understand? This when you look at how the world is going and so on. You know, we are in a crisis, whether people don't want to admit it or not, right? But at the same time, everybody has to realize they're in the same ship. You understand? The politicians might be thieving enough money that they could jump and they could move to Canada or something like that, but the majority of us can't.
So Niran, if I may jump in.
Yeah.
You said a couple of things which were at odds with each other. Sorry, I'm referring to the earlier contributor.
Mm-hmm.
Government for certain things, but as you just said quite eloquently, in a crisis, we look to see how we could use our own agency and innovate and do what we need to do. I think that's a spirit we're trying to ignite. You mentioned the idea of a business park or an incubation hub. I think that's an ideal for some of us, and that would really make a difference. What do you see us needing to do without the externality of the reliance on, the government structures and the bureaucracies that are attached to that to get closer? And how could a grouping like this, CariSTEM, and the minds we have on this particular forum help make that difference?
Well, outside of government, because I've always been an advocate of as little government as possible. You understand? And I've always maintained that private enterprise is the way to go. That being said, private enterprise tends not to align to anything until it serves their best interest. But at the same time, you do have a lot of people who it has a lot of money floating around there, and the thing about it is they kind of get people on the same page and having, maybe more of these collaborations, but actually people who genuinely willing to put the money where their mouth is, so to speak. You understand? It might necessarily be let's use the example of you creating a makerspace. It might not necessarily be a guy who have cash, but guess what? He might have an acre of land or 2 acres of land that he might be willing to lease somewhere that he's not doing anything with. You understand? And pooling those resources, and coming and getting people together. Because we have people from all over the Caribbean. We have one gentleman all from England. You understand? And the thing about it is that we have not tapped into our diaspora or even the private enterprise. But as I told somebody, I say, if you want to get private enterprises involved, then show them how this can make them money. That's the easiest solution. You understand? If you tell a business person, here's what, you don't need to have a machine shop because we're going to build this thing and we're going to have this collaborative machine space where if you need something prototype, we can do it, prototype it for you, and you don't have to cough up, $2 million in equipment. You understand? Here's what, come in as a partner and cough up $250,000, and you get 10 people there. If you get all equipment and everybody shares the cost, you understand? So you have to kind of double-side this thing, and coach it, because you have to remember that everybody has their own agenda, their own interests. It's just a matter of you're trying to get as many of those agendas and interests aligned with each other, and that's the real devil in the details, really, I don't think that there's any one, there's no magic bullet for this, it will be a case by case, every country will be slightly different, but if we wait for government to lead the charge, that's not going to happen. What I would suspect is if you get enough people and some movement starts to be made, government be the bandwagon, the politicians be the bandwagon, so that then you get them throwing back in some support, and then of course you'll get people like IDB and all these guys willing to jump on board that, but it has to be, you need to have a bunch of like-minded people who are willing to put in the work, right? Unfortunately, as I told somebody, as I haven't been around the NGO space and been in private enterprise and so on, with any NGO, if you look at it, you might have a couple hundred members, but guess what? You have a core group of about 10, 15 people who always do all the heavy lifting. And that's how it tends to work, but to get that right 10, 15 people is the tough part. And I think that is where, maybe focus it down a little bit, and you find people willing to put in the work, whether it's not money, but time, and effort, because you're literally trying to turn a super tanker in a way. It will take 5 miles to stop, and a couple and about another 8 miles after that to change direction. Far less to try and make it do a U-turn. You're trying to overcome a very large amount of inertia, be it political or cultural, and that is the problem we have. We have a lot of inertia that we need to overcome, because in the Caribbean, everybody's quick to say you're going to fail. This, but you want to do what? You want to make equipment? Why I can buy it cheaper from China? You understand? It's a mindset thing, and that's the biggest enemy.
So I would add.
I just want to add one thing quickly there. You see the Caribbean diaspora, and I think a number of people in here represent that, because I heard a couple of people mention that they're not currently in the Caribbean. I think for the third industrial revolution, we need them. I think they need to do their part, because technically they've gotten certain skills. I think they have a lot of skills that they can add and bring back to help bring about the change that we're talking about here. Because we're talking about IoT, we've mentioned all the industries that it could help, and in some cases, I mean, just based on the contributions here, the people in the diaspora already have some set of experience, with technology applications in these different sectors, be it health, be it transportation, and hopefully energy, because I think that is something that definitely needs to turn around. And one person mentioned energy earlier, and so and when I mention government, in no way do I mean wait on government. I mean, I'm not that kind of person, but I'm just saying they're a necessary part of the puzzle. And so as I mentioned earlier, that skills is lacking, and so we need to. I am asserting that. I'm not sure if that's not what came from the group, and I think where we can bridge that gap is by people coming back. And I think it was Niran who mentioned earlier, that one of the cultural issues we have, I don't know about the other Caribbean islands, but definitely Trinidad and Tobago, is knowledge sharing. And knowledge sharing, as he eloquently put, how important that was or is to forming and continuing Silicon Valley. Knowledge sharing is very, very important to us quickly. Somebody mentioned in the chat leapfrogging, right? I mean, you don't get that by everybody hoarding, their information, or everybody, going off, getting their success and not bringing back to the community. That is so. Yeah.
I think I would say that I think in general, you need both government and business. I mean, I think saying it's one or the other is not really logical.
Yeah, and can I just add to that actually, so I was thinking it's more that we need to get into that space of thinking it's about collective action. It's not, and that's the point you're making. It's about working collaboratively. It's not the government leading this. In fact, actually, I've been on several committees or task force where you've got the private sector and you've got the public sector as well. And you actually have rotations in who is chairing. You have, different partners bringing their concerns to these meetings. You have agreements that are being made that benefits everybody wants to get something out of that. Everybody's working towards a common goal, a common objective. And it's about sort of defining what that common objective is and then agreeing what is the action that we need to take to get to that, that common objective. So you know, the government has a role because it has the mechanism set up. Don't forget that the government owns a significant amount of assets. For example, road infrastructure. You can't ignore the fact that Internet of Things, like especially the transport systems, depends on road infrastructure that government actually has control over. So therefore, they're an important partner. And businesses, for example, I've actually had engagement with, say, like ports here in the United Kingdom, right? The ports actually depend on the roads. You can't ignore the fact that the ports need to be a sort of important partner in there, but then the government needs to sort of maybe, you know, benefit from perhaps maybe funding from the ports themselves, or benefiting from the roads and creating some of the issues to fund some of the problems. So that's what you call planning gain, where you have these big developments that are being proposed and the government stepping in to say, okay, you're creating some of the problems. We want to be able to help you to achieve some of the common objectives, but you need to fund part of it, and we will put in 50%. So it's working in a sort of collective or collaborative sort of way to achieve that common objective.
So guys, I'm going to try to wind up now because we're going to, wow. So we're going to have only two people speak now. So that's Anselm, and then followed by Dan. So Anselm, if you don't mind.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, just driving. Yeah, I'm just wondering if the current pandemic, if it provides an excellent opportunity to actually apply the Internet of Things, you know, in terms of, let's say, tracking people's movements, seeing whether the clusters develop when people go to certain places. Thinking probably that, let's assume there'll be devices at, let's say, ATMs, at supermarkets that will ping your phone. That will, when you enter a bus, it would, you know, communicate with your phone, and data is gathered on a voluntary basis to try to determine whether the spikes are associated with, you know, particular movements of people, particular visits to particular locations and so on. So I'm just wondering, you know, if that has been contemplated at this time, you know, because they say you should not waste a crisis, and to me the pandemic is an opportunity to put, you know, IoT to excellent use.
I'll let two responses on that. So who would like to respond on that? Does anyone want to respond to that question?
There was some attempts to provide contact tracing and so on, but at the time, and this was probably back in February, the initiative really didn't take off. And then there was, ironically, some competition between UWI and some other private groups with regards to, you know, the whole development of the thing. And I think it is stalled out, you know. So at least in Trinidad, that is why we don't really have anything too much in that regard.
And does anyone else want to make a comment to Anselm's question? Okay. So obviously we can carry on these discussions offline afterwards and etc. on our Facebook group. And we'll have a Danny, sorry.
Oh, yes. Just harking back to the education and the government issue. I think a lot of it is the government, but a lot of it also is our mindset as people, as was said. For example, all of us in here have had some exposure to technology that brought us to this point where we saw an IoT discussion and conference and we wanted to jump on it because we know that technology is important. So why weren't there more people? It was, I'm sure a lot of people saw it, but they didn't think that technology was that important. And we have that mindset, especially in the Caribbean, that, you know, be a doctor, be an accountant, be a lawyer, and then, okay, yeah, you can be an engineer. I'm lucky in that I tell people I've been doing technology for 41 years, and I'm 41 years old because as soon as I came out the womb, my dad had me on a computer. I was using the oldest gateways, the oldest Dells, the oldest Acers. If it's any boy that knows how to hack, it's me. My dad gave me an old computer and I broke it. And he told me, unless I can fix it, I cannot get a new computer. So I had to take the BIOS off a motherboard and jerry-rig it to fit the BIOS in the current motherboard, hot boot it, flash it over, and then take it out while the computer was running to put in the old BIOS so I could reflash the correct firmware on it. So I say all that to say our parentage, our families, our communities, the people that support us, along with the government, we all have to change our mindset. We all have to start looking towards that future, because I fully believe in the next 20 to maybe 30 years, the jobs that a lot of people hold near and dear will be gone. Automation and losing as less people as possible will be the name of the game. So we need to put our people and ourselves on the forefront of defining our own future and our own destiny. If you cannot be a gas station attendant, then we need you to learn how to design the pumps, right? Design the monitoring system, design the gas station itself. If you cannot manufacture things, you need to design the machines that do these things. If you're not in a supermarket selling goods or bagging groceries, then you need to be the one that's monitoring the camera and the self-checkout system. And we need to put the Caribbean and ourselves into that frame of mind going into the future, because the rest of the world will not spare a second glance to crush us if they can. So we need to develop our people, and our people are our greatest resource. So we need to start thinking not just in the now, but in the where do we see the Caribbean and ourselves, wherever we may be in the world, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. When your grandchildren go to school and have to do things, will they be able to get a job? Will they be able to have a place in this society? That's how we have to be thinking going forward. Thanks.
So I think that was a great segue to your next discussion topic in terms of the jobs of the future.
So I think in closing, I think that's a good one. In closing, there's only one thing I'd say: we should maybe be not so hard on people, because maybe it's just that our group doesn't have the reach yet, and so many people did not see the topic, and we shouldn't assume that everybody understands what the topic was about. So in closing, I'd like to say thank you everyone for coming. I hope the point of these events is to have discussion and to have more people reaching out and speaking about technical things and STEM and science. And so hopefully you will kind of follow us and kind of advertise events. And if you have ideas for events, feel free to drop them to us, and we wouldn't mind hosting them or having you host an event if you think the topic makes sense, right? That you'd like to speak about. Our Facebook group is the CariSTEM group. Join us, post things on the page, say what you'd like us to talk about. So in closing, I'd like to say once again, thank you. And I will just pop up the next event. See? So our next event will be on the 16th of December, and it will be on will COVID-19 stimulate an environmental awakening? So I guess that goes to some of the things that I think it was, so I think one of the last speakers asked about what the effect of COVID will have on us in terms of IoT, right? So thank you very much for attending, and keep in touch.